My name is Angelo Lopez. I am the editorial cartoonist for the Philippine News Today, a Filipino-American community newspaper based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I am here today, I am honored today to speak to three very distinguished editorial cartoonists who work in three very different media, animation, comics journalism, and graphic novels. So I want to thank all you three for coming here. Let me do a brief introduction first. I have it written down here. Kevin Necessary right now is the president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. He's been doing a weekly editorial cartoon for the Cincinnati Enquirer since 2020, right? Your work has appeared in USA Today, Politico, The Week, and GoComics.com. And you were previously the editorial cartoonist and comics journalist for WCPO TV in Cincinnati. And you've won the Ohio Valley Regional Emmy and 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards for your comics journalism, Living in the Shadows, about an undocumented woman and her family living in Cincinnati. So thank you, Kevin.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sure. And well, I don't have to tell you, but I'll tell the viewers. You've created editorial cartoons in various media, animation, visual essays, live sketches, and traditional print for the Washington Post. You've won the Pulitzer Prize in 2001 for your print cartoons, and you won the National Cartoonist Society's Reuben Award for Outstanding Cartoonist for 2016. And you've won the International EWK Award, named after the legendary Swedish cartoonist Ewert Karlsson in 2021. And you were a Pulitzer Prize finalist for your illustrated reporting and cartooning in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dan, last but not least, Dan Nott, you've done short comics and illustrations for investigative journalism in the Nib, Spotlight PA, WBUR, and the NJ Advanced Media. Does NJ mean New Jersey?
New Jersey, yeah.
Okay. You've been the lead writer and cartoonist for a nationally distributed comic in the U.S. government called This Is What Democracy Looks Like. And you have done a comic on civics and democracy in Vermont called Freedom and Unity. You teach an MFA class on making comics and comics history at the Center for Cartoon Studies. And you've also done a graphic novel and stuff, which is going to come out next year. And I want to start this by just giving you a chance to talk about your graphic novel and stuff. So would you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah. It's and it's interesting to start off with this because I started and I met Ann and Kevin through editorial cartooning, which is this daily practice of producing a cartoon every day and publishing it. So to start off talking about a graphic novel that I worked on for like 4 or 5 years and is still not out, it feels like the opposite sort of process. But yeah, I got into, I was a student at the Center for Cartoon Studies and got into the idea of using longer form comics to explore topics, especially kind of like comics essays, and decided to use comics to explore how we think about various infrastructures and the things like the internet and the electric grid and water systems, and like how they actually work and how they emerged, and using the sort of visual power of comics to get at things that are hard to take pictures of or hard to explain, and take a reader through like the different histories to understand how these systems came to be in sometimes very arbitrary ways that we now have to deal with. So it was, like I said, it was a very long project. I took about like a year to research each of the 3 chapters, and through the process of learning about them, because I didn't know that much before learning about them, totally made me see the world in a different way. And I'm hoping that like kind of comes through to the reader as well.
Oh, okay, sure. When's it going to be published again?
It's in mid-March, I think March 14th.
Okay, sure. Hold on, let me just turn off my phone. Here. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's cool. I want to start this off because in the past 2 weeks the midterms has been a huge thing and stuff. Oh, actually, have you finished or yeah, I was interrupted by my phone.
Oh yeah, yeah, no,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay. So the
sure.
midterms has been, it's just popped up, right? And stuff. And since you're all are political cartoonists and stuff, I'm actually I've been dying to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on the midterms? And I guess, have you canceled your plane tickets to Canada? So, you know, you know,
And I'd say Anne should probably go first, since she's got. I think you've got the widest audience.
I
The
thought
national beat.
I thought
Yeah.
just whitest audience.
Oh, well, then probably that too.
Yeah, well, okay. First of all, the whole red wave thing. I mean, I didn't really think that was going to happen. Um, but it was still surprising to me that how it ended up. I mean, I guess I had a lot of faith in women.
okay.
Frankly, I knew how angry women were just by talking to my friends, and they were mad.
When are you speaking specifically about the abortion ruling?
Yeah, the Supreme Court. Sure. And I know I'm not criticizing you, but it's not just about abortion.
Okay.
It's about control. I mean, myself as a woman who has never had children and obviously can't have them now, it doesn't impact me directly, but it makes me furious that as a grown woman, one who can make her own decisions, who is just as capable as a grown man to make important decisions, is being told by not just the Supreme Court, but now individual small governments, local governments, that they have to actually have a politician involved in their private choices. So so getting back to the midterms, it didn't surprise me that the women were really out in force. So, while I would have loved to have seen the House not flip, it didn't go with a big majority. So we're going to have an interesting situation.
Yeah, yeah. How did you guys react? Was it? I was surprised. I didn't have that. I think it's one of the reasons why it's important to have a woman cartoonist, because as a man, I was kind of scared about the midterms, because I was expecting the red wave, and I didn't have that perspective, of the woman's anger and stuff. So, did you guys have that sense too, or?
Yeah, I had both a sense of relief and of disappointment. Like relief that the red wave never materialized, nationally, and that was great. Um, but the disappointment came from where I live, which is only became redder, and it I'm looking at the rest of the country and thinking, like, what happened here. And so yeah, I mean, there's a there's a sense that the end times were at least pushed back a little bit, but it's still, as Ann said, there's going to be a very interesting 2 years where uh, are we going to have gridlock in Washington? Are we going to have how contentious is it going to be with that very slim Republican majority in Congress, and what kind of chaos could come from that? And, I was, again, very heartened to see that a lot of state houses are, have flipped, and except for Ohio's, and Ohio's is just now much more entrenched as being very ruby red. Um, and from my perspective, I think that that's where a lot of the political battles are going to be played out in the next couple of years. Again, just to follow up on what Ann was saying, it's not just the people in Congress who are dictating and want this control. It's the smaller governments, it's the state governments, it's the municipalities that in some cases are just circling the wagons and are trying everything they can to control voters, to control the populace. And thankfully, in much of the country, that was rejected, but there are still places like Ohio where we've got a lot of work to do.
Uh, okay. Are you going through the stuff with like city councils and attacking schools and
Oh,
libraries and stuff? Or,
very much so.
okay.
Um, and just like in the rest of the country, Ohio's larger metropolitan areas are very blue, but the rest of Ohio is rural, and in those places, yeah, you do have a lot of in the rural areas and suburban areas, you do have a lot of uh, very contentious political battles happening in city councils and school boards. Um, a lot of stuff about CRT and abortion and other hot topic issues.
Okay. Yeah. Dan, in Vermont, that's where Bernie Sanders comes from, right? I mean, are you,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, is it, do you feel that too, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reflecting a little bit on this before we started talking today, but I think the work that I make has become less like nationally focused. My book itself like doesn't really deal too much with like the American political system, and my work lately has been more focused on local governance, and maybe that's something that comes with like living in Vermont too, where there's like a big focus on local governance. But that's one of the things that I have been taking away from still following the national conversation around politics is as things get more and more gridlocked at the national level, it seems like people are more open to looking at what can be done at the state and even the municipal levels. Like I personally started to get involved in my like town here, which is like a 10,000 person town.
Oh,
And there's like a lot of opportunities to do things at that local level, and it can be a nice way to move past some of the frustration of seeing things play out on the national stage.
oh, cool. Oh, cool. Thank you. Now the three of you, as I mentioned before, you've done work in various media, animation, comics journalism, graphic novels, but all three of you have also done the traditional editorial cartooning, right? So I'm curious, since you have experience in all those various different media, I want to ask, what do you see as the advantages of like these various media have over traditional editorial cartoons, but vice versa? What do you think are the advantages of the traditional editorial cartooning over these various media?
Do you want me to start first?
Oh yeah, sure. Anybody can start. Yeah, you know.
Well, yeah, like you said, I started out in print because that's what was then. I started my first published cartoon was in 1992, and so I was single panel print. I think for me, the reason that I decided that to go into other mediums was because I had been doing syndicated print for about 15 years, and I was sort of looking for a personal challenge, and I had, and I, of course, and at the same time, print was shrinking. The cartoons were about this big on newspapers, so it was even difficult to read them. Even the way I drew, which was pretty simple, it was just difficult to read, and I was aware of that. But I had an animation background, and I just started thinking, how could we? And this was about 2006, by the way. So I was just thinking how we could translate a print cartoon into an animated one. So that's what I did for myself. Now, once I sold that idea to the Post, the reason I started branching out into other things was because along with the fact that print was starting to die and online news was starting to become much more important to everyone, I just could kind of see where things were going. And I thought, first I was doing animated, and I kind of hit a wall there because I was doing a movie, a Flash. They were sticking it in the video system. So that meant ad pre-roll before it. So anything that's in the video system has to have ads before it. So these ads were 30 seconds long. I had an animation that was 15. So I was getting readers telling me, I'm not sitting through that.
I didn't know.
In order to survive, I started thinking, well, okay, I need to do something else. So I approached my editor and I said, give me a blog just like you give all the other writers a blog, which meant now I could expand again. So going back to your question about what does print give you, or static cartoons, okay? Then it gave me the opportunity to choose what medium I was going to do for my idea. So the best medium. So if it needed to be a static, I would do it static. If it needed to be animated, I'd do it animated. If it needed long form, I'd do that. You know, so it just gave me a lot more freedom. And I think sometimes, you know, static cartoons are more potent than even animation. But we have to realize that, you know, we're online now. People like to see different things, you know, so I think it's good for us all to adapt. And the long form that Dan's doing is fabulous because it's explaining things. It's like, you know, it's like cartoon reporting. And people are really very attracted to that. I mean, I taught a class at Cal Arts, and I can tell you the majority of my students were doing long form. That was their choice. I gave them a choice. They could do anything. And most of them like long form.
Okay. When you say long form, a couple pages or, you know.
Well, anything from a graphic essay to, well, they weren't doing novels, obviously, but yeah, I'd say graphic essays, you know, some of them, you know, several, either long scroll or several pages long, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think it would be too hard for you to grade a graphic novel if all your students.
I would be impressed if my student decided to do that.
Yeah, I know. 20 graphic novels. Sorry, you'll have to get the grade next semester.
Yeah, I guess that to jump in on that, like, I mean, it was that single panel image that I like really fell in love with when I was in college, and I was like trying to find a way to combine art and like caring about current events. Just the immediacy of it and like the power of it is something that I still think is like so specific to the traditional like editorial cartoon to be able to, it's like harder not to see than it is to, you know, like to not read it. Like you can really create an impact with that, with a way that I think is harder to do when you're like asking someone to sit and like read a long form thing. I think part of my transition to doing more long form stuff is that I think I was always trying to like use the single panel to like try to like explain things or convey an understanding when that's maybe not necessarily what it's best at. Like I think that single form often is like, the single panel form really is best to like convey something like stark that you're like hitting someone over the head with. And like, so I realized that I could sort of use the longer form stuff to get at what I'm like more naturally, my voice is like more naturally suited for. And I think that for me, comics have been like, as I said before, like a good way to like sort of catalog my process of learning about things, and then hoping that that like sense of discovery comes through for a reader that's also reading it.
Yeah, I do single panel, and I when I try to do a more complex subject, I struggle. So I struggle with nuance. So I guess for the two of you, the longer form helps you with nuance, I guess.
Yeah, and just I think for me, something that I was thinking a lot about is just the like even reading the news every day. And like studying political science, right? Like it's rare to find sort of the baseline understanding that you need to understand like even like what the difference between the House and the Senate is, and like, you know, how systems are set up and how they work. We get a lot of these like day-to-day we get a lot of this day-to-day information about things, but sometimes I think we're just like expected to retain all of like the fundamental understanding of systems that we learned in high school and like never learn about it again. So I found like comics are like a great way to refresh some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and just to to build on what both Dan and Ann said, like very much like Dan, I found more of a natural voice through longer form topics. My background's in newspaper journalism, and so I've spent time, reporting. I've spent time, being a copy editor, and that's much more how I process what I do. So, there is that, that sense of I can't be as nuanced as I want to be in an editorial cartoon, and especially right now when I'm doing weekly cartoons. I have to almost be as broad as possible so that everyone in this region can understand, a single cartoon and the topic. And, and when I really do want to get into what's behind the issues and, what's at play there. And I think one of the advantages of, the longer form pieces, especially when you're dealing with comics and cartoons, is that much like an editorial cartoon, people will see it as a drawing, and I think that disarms them a little bit. So you can be presenting weighty topics, or you can be presenting dry topics, like how government works or how systems work, but they'll see those drawings, and so yeah, it disarms them a little bit and then engages them and it draws them in. And we do the same thing with our single panel or single image editorial cartoons. I mean, it's the sugar that helps the medicine go down. But yeah, I think it does. It allows you to really dig into topics, to dig into stories. I personally feel like my art skills aren't that great, but I think I'm a good storyteller, and so it allows me to really express myself better. Sometimes when I'm doing longer form pieces than when I'm doing single panel.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the movie Spotlight. The longer pieces are sort of like the comics version of Spotlight, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to talk about one project that I did a couple of years ago when the city of Cincinnati was decriminalizing marijuana. I mean, it's very easy to to say, like, to try to distill something like that marijuana is not as harmful as the government might want you to think, or that we should be getting rid of convictions. But if you really want to get into the topic of why there are the convictions, what the historical background of that is, what the convictions are, breaking it down by demographics, I couldn't do that in a single panel, so I had to do a long form piece.
Yeah.
And I personally I love digging into subjects like that. Just kind of like what Dan was saying. Just time to research and time to learn. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. For me, I do a lot of research in my cartoons because I've only been in the Philippines 1 month my entire life. But sometimes it can be I can know more than the readers. And so in a single panel and stuff, I have to be careful not to do a cartoon that my readers won't understand, because I've done the research and stuff. And I'm wondering, it sounds like for you three that the longer form is helpful in that because it puts context into what the cartoon means and stuff. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were talking about how the Washington Post allows, gives you opportunities to do like the animation, the longer form and stuff. Is the relationship with your editors helpful for you in getting those opportunities, or?
Well,
or do you fight for it and stuff? I mean,
no. I mean, I obviously have editors because I've had cartoons killed before, so I know they're there. But no, I started out in syndication, so obviously I had no editor.
Oh, okay.
And the way that's edited is, editors that buy your stuff just don't run it. And then I've had now 2 editors at the Post. They've been pretty much left me alone. I mean, I do have a relationship with a design director there where we do interactive stuff because I need obviously help with coding. So, that's where I'm a little bit back and forth. But, there's such talent there that, it's just it's actually a joy. And I've actually thanked some of them for saving me from myself. So
Oh, okay. I'm just curious because I don't think I email my cartoons, so I don't remember what my editors look like. I don't think, I haven't seen them since 2011 and stuff. So I'm wondering if, like, when I talk to other cartoonists, I think a lot of times their relationship with the editors determines how much freedom they have, right? And stuff. So I'm just curious, but with those opportunities, what do you love, about doing animation for political commentary? Or the longer form stuff? What do you love about that?
well, I think I love the fact that it gives me the freedom to choose what's the strongest way to show my idea, like what Dan was saying. Sometimes you need that long form to explain. I mean, I did that. I was trying to explain, this was actually during Obamacare, all the debate during it. I did a long form explaining and criticizing, the Democrats as well for what they were doing, because they weren't allowing any kind of discussion about single payer system at that time. And I did a long form piece, showing that the Republicans, they don't have a health care plan. They have a health care insurance plan that they want. It's about access. So, I did a long form on that, but as I think Dan mentioned, sometimes a single panel, you need to just hit the reader right in between the eyes, and it's just, it just gives me the freedom. I think as editorial cartoonists, especially nowadays, we have to be ready to pivot.
Okay.
If
It
you
also
want
sounds like fun. The freedom sounds like fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fast pace, that's for sure. But the 24/7 news cycle is also the reason for that. But yeah, it's just, I think the more you can pivot and figure out what works best at the time, you're gonna reach more people.
Okay. What's your process? I'm curious. I mean, do you do the pencil and pen and stuff, or do you have Procreate or?
No, I still do everything by hand.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the only thing I do is I'm doing GIFs now, so no sound. I do that in Photoshop, but it's very intuitive for a dinosaur animator like me. No, I do. The only time I do any kind of computer generated art is when I do an animation, I'll do the color, but I scan in my drawings. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Yeah. Kevin, you've done wonderful comics journalism pieces on undocumented immigrants, on the children of the opioid crisis. Those are the ones I've seen in your website. And I'm just curious, what's your process, and what do you love about comic? You mentioned a little bit about it before, but if you want to be more, if you have other reasons why you like comics journalism, but I guess what's your process in doing that?
Well, I mean, the reason I really do like it is, as both Dan and Ann have said, like it does provide, it does help provide context. And it's, it does, it allows you to really dig into, a subject and just, present, sometimes my comics have been, less weighty. I've done, history comics, about topics here in Cincinnati, which are just, fun pieces, and I love doing those too. But I also do enjoy the, like the more serious topics, and regardless of what the topic is, I love doing research. I love, going into a topic, and kind of like what you were saying, Angelo, like more about the topic than a lot of your readers.
Yeah.
And what we're doing here is journalism, regardless of if we're doing a single panel or a long form piece. And and to me that's the most fun part of the process, is learning about something and trying to digest it, and then how can I get that out. In terms of my actual process, it depends on if I'm working alone or if I'm working with a writer. So I have partnered with writers before, and what I like to do is I like to be with them as they're out reporting, so that I'm not just relying on the content that they give me. I'm I'm there, and I'm seeing what the people are talking about. I can write down the quotes myself. I can note down things that I find important. And this doesn't happen all the time when I work with a writer, but a lot of times, we'll go into a project and we'll sort of establish ground rules, like no egos. When I worked on a series called Childhood Saved, which was all about children who were affected by the opioid crisis, the writer would art direct. Like, she came up with color palettes and chose what she wanted the characters to look like. I would take her scripts and I would rewrite them based on how I felt that the story would better flow through comics. And there was never any conflict between us, because we just kind of established those ground rules, and it was a wonderful working relationship. When I'm writing by myself, I like to really beat out the story first. So after I do my interviews, and after I do my research, I go to my favorite tool, which are Post-it notes and note cards, and I just beat out everything in the story. I outline everything. I like being able to move things around. When I used to work in newsrooms, I would take over a conference room sometimes for weeks on end, and just have
Is there a room
tables.
specifically for you, I guess, for
Yeah. But I like that, because I like the flexibility of that. And then from there, once I know the general outline of the story, I will I'll go into either sketchbooks or just loose sheets of paper, and I'll start storyboarding and thumbnailing and writing all at the same time. And that's really where the process takes shape.
Okay.
So by the time I get to the actual drawing of the panels and inking, which I usually do digitally,
Do you do
I'm kind of
Procreate? Do you do Procreate? Or?
yeah. I usually use Procreate. I'll go back and forth between Procreate and Photoshop and pencil and pen, and it's just wherever the idea wants to get out, that's what I use.
Okay, that sounds like fun. Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Dan,
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about the graphic novel, but can you tell me about the process? What you
Yeah,
do?
a lot of it is actually kind of similar to what Kevin was just describing. I try to take like a pretty tactile approach, and like it's like writing an essay, right? You have to like figure out the flow of concepts, and I will often write things down on note cards or little scraps of paper, and try to find a way to structure like all the ideas into like a narrative. And then I work as simply as possible, like on like printer paper with like a mechanical pencil to like sort of figure out what goes in each panel. I print out like standard grids. And yeah, I mean, most of it is like that planning and writing process, and then like the last 10% is the like fun drawing stuff. But I think what I was thinking about listening to Ann and Kevin talk about this is like, I think it can be easy doing comics journalism or long form things to like write a script and then just illustrate it. But I think what really makes it engaging is what I've learned from doing single panel cartoons and looking at like Ann's work and like Matt Worker's work, and like that real like imagination that you can bring, that like I think single panel cartoons are really like known for. When you're like trying to convey something complex, you're using a lot of visual metaphor and you're using these like really imaginative drawings. So that's something that I like constantly am trying to like look at my pages and be like, how can I bring that in instead of just illustrating the text, and like to create something that like you can only do through drawing. And that's like one of the biggest challenges, because I think it's easy to fall back on just like illustrating what's there, but like really thinking about like I mean, so much of what we discuss is in like this visual metaphor. Like I often like screenshot it when I'm like reading the New York Times or whatever, and you see like just the way politicians describe things. It's always through like metaphor. They're always like, it's like starting a car and like jumping out while it's still driving. Like they use all these
Sports metaphors.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of metaphors like that. And I think it's nice to be able to draw those too and to bring those into our work in like a self-conscious kind of way where you're making the reader aware that like that people are like almost trying to trick them through using these metaphors. So I think part of my process too is also thinking about like what are the visual metaphors that we're surrounded with and how can I bring that into my work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm curious. This is a weird question, but when I've tried doing multi-panel cartoons, I struggle with dialogue. My dialogue is terrible. Every time I try to read my dialogue, I keep thinking, "Gosh," and so I always go back and stuff. How are you guys struggle with dialogue and stuff when you do your stuff, or?
Oh, yeah, I think that's to me, that's one of the hardest parts of, regardless if it's a single panel or um, a long form piece, it's trying to, have the right wording. In fact, I think sometimes with a longer piece where I'm doing actual reporting, that's easy because I get to just use quotes. I like,
Oh,
I like being a reporter. So in a lot of the stories that I've done long form, I will, um, have my sources and I'll draw my sources actually saying the things. But with my single panel stuff, yeah, I mean, for like my most recent single panel cartoon, I probably spent just as long getting like two sentences right as I did working on the caricatures, because I wanted it to be right. And at some point I just said, it's good enough and I have to get it out. But yeah, it's a challenge. And whenever I do read my writing for my longer form pieces, I'm always thinking like, wow, it just seems so basic. It's so it's just, it's like a second grader wrote it. So
oh, okay, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. So, I guess before we were rudely interrupted by my free Zoom account, and Dan, do you have anything to add to what Kevin said, or?
You're gonna have to remind me what Kevin
Oh,
said.
But
That wasn't
dialogue.
anything important.
hold on.
I guess, yeah, when I was thinking of it, it just made me think of like another sort of thing that I learned from working in editorial cartoons and is still like really impressive, I think, about it is like the need to simplify your writing so much and like how every word matters so much when you only have a few to choose from. It's like writing poetry or something, right? Like you really
Yeah.
like every like word is so precise, and I think readers don't always know how much like cartoonists have to agonize over like every single word to like, because like the dialogue ends up being such a part of the punchiness of a cartoon, like in addition to the drawings.
Okay.
And I would love to hear what you have to say about that because I think of your work when I think of that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Dan. I actually forgot what I was asking too. So, so, and did you have anything to add? I guess I asked about dialogue and stuff. So,
Just
Yeah,
writing.
I think in terms of obviously a single panel, I mean, I always tend to gravitate toward the ones that have the least amount of words, if any. I mean, I think our colleagues overseas are do more of that than we do. They tend to rely on visual metaphors and the image. I think American cartoonists tend to write a little more. Now, obviously, when you're doing an explanation longer form, you're going to use words.
yeah.
But I think it's really important that you're careful, what you're using because, frankly, I mean, I know I'm this way when I'm reading them. If I am confronted by a gazillion words, that are this small, it's going to be hard for me to want to read it or go all the way through.
Yeah.
And so I really think that it's important that, we are cartoonists. We deal with images. We should be, like what Dan was saying, he really is looking for those interesting visual metaphors that will enable his readership to really understand what he's trying to explain rather than just illustrating, how the electrical grid works. It's kind of dry, right? So yeah, I think we're visual commentators. We should take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And
So,
I think there is, I mean, there is that trap. especially with longer form pieces where you can get so involved with the writing process
Mhm.
that even if you are drawing and writing at the same time, like I do, and it seems like Dan does. Well, both Dan and Ann do this as well. You can the act of creation can be a little exhausting. So you can find yourself slipping back into, oh, here's what I wrote, and I'm just going to do something that is much more literal to the script that I have, or the words that I have. And I always have to bring myself out of it and like kind of step back to say like, okay, how can I get back into using less words or creating a more interesting visual metaphor, and using that medium the way it's intended. And one of the things that I like about long form pieces is it gives you a breathing space. With a single panel cartoon, you have to throw everything out there. Whether you're using words and images or just images, you're throwing everything out there all at once.
Yeah.
With a single panel piece, I can have space to, or longer pieces, I have the space to um, throw more storytelling into just my drawings.
Yeah.
And I really I like that. I like that process. And it challenges me because I'm not as strong of an artist. I'm more of a storyteller.
I think I just wanted to point out real quick, it's really interesting to listen to Dan and Kevin talk about their creative process in the long form, because I think that's what distinguishes, true visual commentators then from the trend of taking a writer and just hooking them up with an illustrator, because we write as well as draw. So when we do that, that's really visual commentary. We've seen a trend, and we saw it with the Pulitzers a few years back, giving the award to a writer and an illustrator. And it's like, okay, then all you're doing is opening up another category for a writer to go get his own illustrator and have him illustrate what he's writing.
Yeah.
That's not the same. I mean, we are the creators. We write, and we integrate that into our visual representation of what we're trying to make the reader understand. So it's really great to listen to them because they're doing everything.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, it's helpful for me too because I'm a single panel guy. My efforts at multi-panel stuff, like I said, for me, the dialogue has always been my blocking point and stuff. But for me, I'm a little different. I love the drawing parts. I'm one of those cartoonists where if I don't have a good idea, I just work on the cartooning on the drawing, and I'm hoping nobody notices that the idea isn't any good. you know, But I love the cross hatching and stuff like that. But I'm curious. Who are your heroes? Who are your cartoonist heroes and influences? And how did they influence like either your long form stuff or your short stuff?
Well, I'll just it's very easy for me to know like who two of my formative heroes are. Jim Borgman, who was my predecessor at the Inquirer.
Oh,
So there, I draw a lot of cultural similarities from him because we grew up in the same area. We both speak in the same metaphors. Even though he's decades older than I am, we still have those connections, and I grew up with his artwork. But then in high school, I found a ratty old copy of or a very beaten up copy of some of Kevin Gallagher's work.
oh yeah.
And Cal is he is such a he is very wordy. He is he does a lot of multi-panel comics and his single editorial cartoons, and that that really kind of got into my brain space as well. So I whenever I get very verbose in a cartoon, I always blame it on Cal because he was one of my earliest influences.
You give him snide looks when you see him and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Dan, Ann, who are your influences?
Um, so yeah, I'm thinking about, I guess, drawing from a bunch of different influences, and I feel like caricature was never really my thing, or like part of my voice as a cartoonist, but I was really inspired by the sort of like both like the imaginary spaces of like Kevin Gallagher and Matt Worker, on like the single panel editorial front, but also like growing up, like Matt Bors was like the closest to my age, of like a cartoonist doing like different things with editorial cartoons, and I think showed me that there's like a different sort of way of approaching it. I've also been really inspired by cartoonists like Joe Sacco, and
Yeah.
but also like children's book authors too, like David McCulley and Virginia Lee Burton, who I discovered more recently, whose like mid-century children's books have become like some of my favorite. Just how she approached like explaining, or like talking about like complicated ideas and like with a lot of depth, and like really, really beautiful art that's like really, really well designed. So like, yeah, I've been trying to draw from like lots of different influences, and one thing I love about comics is it's such a hybrid medium where you can be throwing all these different art forms into a
Yeah, we're
page.
sort of mutts, right?
uh,
Yeah. I used to work in a library. Do you like Sendak?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who influenced you, Anne?
Well, I started out in animation. So, I didn't get into editorial cartooning until I was almost 30 years old. So a lot of my influences came from, the conceptual artists that, were at Disney and, like the Golden Age and beyond that.
Gord
So
Kimball.
yeah, I mean, a lot of them, you don't even know their names, you know their work because it always had the Disney label on them. But
Yeah. Is it the Nine Old Men? Is that right? The Nine Old Men?
that's some of them, yeah. But like, Mary Blair was a conceptual artist that never animated, or her stuff didn't, her end result didn't end up on the screen. But she was the most amazing colorist. I mean, the colors are just incredible what she's done. And a lot of these guys that did conceptual work were great talking about storytelling. We're just amazing storytellers.
Yeah.
I went to school with a guy actually who unfortunately just recently died, Ralph Eggleston, who worked at Pixar. And he was such an incredible storyteller just through his conceptual art. No words, just images, colors. I mean, it's just amazing work. So that was sort of my early kind of thing. And I did look at editorial cartoons, but only for the art. So like I knew about Oliphant, because his work, his draftsmanship was just the greatest. So I followed that. And I loved Scarf, Gerald Scarf, the British caricatures, who's still working.
Oh, yeah.
Because his stuff was so brutal. I just loved it. But there's lots of people that work today. I think Steve Brodner is brilliant. He's talking about a visual commentator who branches out and does all kinds of things and is constantly exploring. I mean, I'm inspired by him. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with these guys. I love it when I see an artist, a cartoonist deal with storytelling, because that's the whole thing, is you have to be able to tell a story.
Yeah, I discovered Mary Blair a couple years ago. She was in an exhibit at the Walt Disney Museum in San Francisco. And
I saw that. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw it and stuff. It was wonderful. My wife and I went. It's a beautiful location because you can see the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
But when I was there, I thought, God, this is great. And I never heard of her before. And I thought, God, she's wonderful and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those people that everybody that's been in animation knows her, but not really people on the outside. And yeah, she's amazing. That museum is another great place to go just to see the main exhibit of the Disney artifacts from the family. Because I didn't even know this, but Disney was a collector of miniatures.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess after the war, they traveled to Europe quite a bit. And he bought all these beautiful little miniatures. I mean, just gorgeous. You could just spend your whole day looking at the the glass cases, you know.
Yeah. Well, if you go to Disneyland, I think what was that? It's a Small World. That was designed by her.
Yes, she did the conceptual work for that. Absolutely. So she was in the animation department before that. So like she did conceptual work for what's it called? Oh, I'm blanking now. She did conceptual work for
The
Alice
Three
in Wonderland.
Caballeros, the Three Caballeros too, I guess.
Yes, she did that. Yeah, and actually that's interesting because she went on a sketching trip with a bunch of Disney animators. It was during the war, and that's where she discovered her color sense, because she was in South America and she saw
Wow.
beautiful colors and scenes, and that's where that started from. And yeah, and then so she worked for a time at Disney, and then she left to go to New York to work in the commercial industry, and then she came back and did for Imagineering, she did It's a Small World.
Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah.
You know, I'm curious. Since you work in the Washington Post, does Herb Block and Tom Tolles and those, do they kind of hang as like I don't know about it's something it's such a wonderful political cartooning tradition. Is that something that hangs over you and stuff, or is it I don't know the right way to describe, but is it something that kind of
Ghosts? No.
yeah. I mean, like when you're drawing, do you kind of look over your shoulder and think, I better do something good because they're hanging over me, I guess.
Well, Tom was, I started with them in 2008 when the two divisions were separate. They had WashingtonPost.com and then they had the print, and they merged a year later. But Tom was already the print cartoonist there. So I actually worked with him. I mean, we both did cartoons at the same time until he retired. But I was online. They occasionally used me in print, but he was the print cartoonist. So yeah.
Okay.
But the Post is like everywhere else. They're starting to change. They know how important online content is.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm curious. Now, Ann and Dan, you're both teachers, right? Is that right? And stuff. And you both teach comics and animation. Do you see anything really cool and innovative with your students in terms of like comics and animation that does political commentary? Or maybe not.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of I guess the trends that I notice. I think between teaching and like working with the Loker Award for 6 years now, it's been interesting to see how people in the younger generation, Gen Z, I guess, is like, at least the Loker Award is 18 to 25, so it is a different generation of cartoonists. And like a lot of the people at CCS that I teach, I mean, none of them would consider themselves working in the tradition of political cartooning. But a lot of them are making work that's, nonfiction comics, or like where commentary is a big part of it, and like that kind of like personal expression that I think is like very political. So I mean, there's like such a vibrant community of young cartoonists in this country, like all over the country. It's like really well organized. They have conventions all over the place that are just starting up again this year. And it's a really vibrant community of people learning from each other and like pushing the form forward. And it's all it's based off of like small publishing and self-publishing. So it's it's very insular in that way. In some ways, it's like the opposite of editorial cartooning, which is like sort of about spreading everything out to a mass audience. But yeah, I wish, I mean, part of what I would love to see the Loker Award be able to accomplish more is to bridge that gap between this like really vibrant community of young cartoonists and the tradition of editorial cartooning, and to see where it could go.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Dan probably, he teaches more. I'm just part-time. I just teach one class a week.
I just teach one class too.
Oh.
But, yeah.
But he's right. It's a different cartoonist. I mean, my impressions from my students is, first of all, they're much more aware of what's going on in the world than I ever was at that age. They're very involved. They're very activist. A lot of them had no idea what an editorial cartoon was, and they do not consider themselves editorial cartoonists. Dan's absolutely right. But they do have things to say. And a lot of it, as Dan pointed out, is very, it's social commentary. Maybe it's not specifically about what's going on in Washington, D.C., but it's about issues, and they're very passionate about it. My last class was absolutely amazing. I remember this one woman who would just come in and just have, notebooks of her notes with, just of what she was writing, and she was drawing, and I was so impressed by her. They're all really great stuff. I think the only thing that I think is a little bit, I remember my first class. My first class was during when COVID started.
Yeah.
So I changed my syllabus as soon as we were all online, and I said, okay, you have to do your last project about COVID. And oh my God, a couple of them, and one in particular, she's like, oh no, I can't do that. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. She was so sick of it already that no, I can't possibly. I really thought she was going to have a stroke. And, I said, look, you don't have to do the political angle of it. Why don't you do something personal, like how it affected you or how it is affecting you? And this woman happened to be from India, and she went back home when COVID started. And she did this wonderful long multi-panel piece about how, because everybody was shut in, and how notoriously polluted India is, that all of a sudden she was able to see the sky and the stars. And she did the whole thing about that and about the environmental impact. And it was the most beautiful piece I'd ever seen, but it was social commentary, So, it's just a different way. And I think editorial cartooning just has to realize that we don't have that paper anymore. We don't have that single panel. It's just not going to continue growing. And we have to embrace the people that Dan's talking about. It's a different community, and let's reach out to their strengths. And that's one of their strengths.
Well, and you actually said, earlier about, how we have to pivot. We as creators have to pivot. And I think, we have to do that not just with our work, but our mindsets. And, that can be hard for us as a community sometimes.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I have these talks and stuff is, I'm in a particular framework, and it's good for me to talk to different cartoonists because I'm learning from you, from listening to all of you and from my previous cartoonist talks, because there's different perspective, different ideas. And, it's good to always to think out of the box and stuff. And I sometimes struggle with thinking outside the box, but it's good that we do and stuff. So, and speaking to community and stuff. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's what my entry point into this was like stumbling. I was talking to Scott Stantis, actually, who someone introduced me to, and he was like, you should go to the AAC conventions. And like going to those conventions was my entry point into drawing cartoons and drawing comics, right? Like I wouldn't have come across it otherwise in the same way. And having that community to go see people present and talk to people and see how people were navigating the landscape of drawing cartoons every year and pivoting and shifting around. I always left those inspired to try something else. It's this idea of community and how important that is for helping us pivot and helping us sort of navigate changes, I think is really important. And it's been great to see the AACB at Crossroads Columbus, because I think that convention in particular is designed to bring in these different strands of cartooning that don't normally get to interact.
Hey, how was it? I wanted to go, but my in-laws got sick, so I had to take care of them. Was it fun? Because I think both of you did Dan and Kevin, I saw your little YouTube thing and stuff. It looked like fun.
I wasn't there this time, but I've been in the past, and I think it's.
I met you at one of them. I met you at the San Francisco one. Yeah. But I think Kevin and Ann, did you have a nice time in the convention?
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, we knew that it was going to be smaller just because this was the first time back from COVID, and you've got, inflation, other travel challenges, but no, it was a lot of fun. It was great to reconnect. I was on just a creative high for about 3 or 4 weeks after, just getting, being, reconnecting with, with people, my friends and my colleagues, um, and then, just with the convention at large, seeing all the different types of creators who were there. And it was just, it was wonderful. It was wonderful to have that energy back, especially after, 2.5 years of not really connecting with other people in person. It was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I saw your video of your talk and stuff, I thought, I gotta think of better questions for this talk. So, but okay.
Kevin did a
I
really good job.
Yeah.
I was on, it was easy mode because I had Ann, I had Tim Campbell and Mark Murphy. And I very specifically, I knew who I wanted on that panel, because of what I knew each of them could bring.
Yeah.
And so so my job was very easy. I just had to give them some questions, and they carried the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. You did a good job. So, okay. My next question, you guys mentioned community, and I wanted to ask about cartoonists who do work for local communities as opposed to cartoonists who do stuff for national communities and stuff. And I think Kevin, you do stuff for Cincinnati,
Mhm.
so I'm guessing that your readership is mainly Ohio, right?
Yeah.
Is that true? And for
Yeah.
me, I do a Filipino American community newspaper. So my readership is basically a Filipino American readership. And Dan, you do stuff for the Nib. And so I was assuming that you do stuff for national stuff, but I'm guessing now you do more stuff for more local Vermont stuff, right?
Yeah, and I've only actually done one piece for the nib. A lot of the projects I've been working on have been longer form, but I have been doing more local
Okay, local stuff.
stuff as well.
Yeah. And Anne, you do, because of your stuff in the Washington Post, your stuff is more national, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my local stuff is, doing stuff about Congress that maybe doesn't get out there, a lot.
Okay.
And I love doing I love doing caricatures, so Congress is perfect for that.
But I'm curious, for you three, what do you, I've talked about this with other cartoonists, but what do you think is the difference in responsibilities of an editorial cartoonist who has a more community specific readership as opposed to an editorial cartoonist that has a more national readership?
Well, with the more community local cartoons, I think you're having a different conversation than you are with the national cartoons. With the national cartoons, you do have to be a little bit more broad.
Yeah.
With the community cartoons and the local stuff, I get to really draw upon myself and upon my knowledge of my community and what I know appeals to them. So the metaphors, the visual metaphors, the language, the way I present things is different. And there's a responsibility to be authentic with it.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really enjoy. So like if you were to look at my cartoons that I've done locally, you're going to see a lot of recurring motifs and images. Cincinnati used to be known as Porkopolis because we had a massive uh, uh, pork production and slaughtering industry here in Cincinnati in the 19th century.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that. Yeah.
you know and and so that became part of Cincinnati's DNA. And then in 1988, as part of the bicentennial here, uh, the idea of the flying pig cropped up as kind of reluctantly as a symbol of the city, but now it's everywhere. I mean, you can't go anywhere without seeing flying pigs, statues, paintings, anything. So I created a character who was a flying pig, and he's my avatar. I can use him to comment about what I think is going on in Cincinnati. I can use them to comment about what Cincinnati is thinking about things in the general zeitgeist. I can use him as as sort of like my mascot, and and I get to draw in other imagery, and pull from pull that locally, and I have to be more authentic, and I get to have a conversation about things that are affecting me, that are affecting my neighbors, and it's very intimate. And I do enjoy that. I think that uh, you know, we need to have the bigger issues. We need to have you know stories about what's happening in Washington, stories of what's happening in Ukraine. But I think to change it up, you have to be able to connect with people with where they live and what they're thinking about, and it's a responsibility to it's a big responsibility, I think, to be someone who is commenting on on things that not every other cartoonist is doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about that in the Vermont context, I mean, Vermont is a pretty unique place in that there's like 600,000 people that live in the entire state. It's like it's such a small
Wow.
political community in so many ways, and like you have like a lot of access to politicians, and to like it's not hard to like get on the phone with like the lieutenant governor here, like it's and like it's one of the more representative or we have like more representatives per constituent than almost any other state at the within like state legislature. So there is this kind of like radical like democratic aspect of politics here, which is kind of interesting.
Mhm.
It is very there is a lot of potential for participation. We don't have any sort of editorial cartooning tradition that I'm aware of like within Vermont, but I always think that it could be like a very powerful thing to challenge people. I mean, we have a Republican governor here, and I could just see that if there was like someone making editorial cartoons about Vermont, like aimed at other like Democrats or progressives, to challenge them.
Oh, Dan, I think he froze.
Them to like powerful thing, the power of an editorial cartoon to a local level. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, am I
Dan.
cutting out? I just
No,
got
yeah, you froze a little bit and stuff, but what you did say sounded interesting.
um, yeah, so but again, I haven't been focused editorially on sort of Vermont politics at all. Like the comic that I did was very much about showing like how the different ways that people can be involved in Vermont and even like outside of government and democracy here.
Dan, what are the local papers in Vermont? What are the
Yeah, so we actually have like a pretty good alt weekly still going called 7 Days in Burlington that everyone reads, and it's there. Sometimes they do run like covers that are like political cartoons. We have a really good nonprofit investigative site called BT Digger that I think runs some of Jeff Danziger's cartoons still, which are still mostly national. And then there's like a few local papers as well. We have a local paper here called the Valley News. It's easy to wrap your head around the whole media landscape here because there's just not very much. It's like an easy state to know everything that's going on.
I just wondered if there were any cartoonists on staff in any of the papers.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the Alt Weekly runs a bunch of different strips. They will occasionally, again, like hire, I forget the cover artist sometimes does editorial cartoons, and Danziger will sometimes do local cartoons, but he's not, I don't think, on staff anywhere. Maybe the Rutland Herald, actually.
Yeah, the Rutland Herald, I think he's with. I mean, I know he does live up there part of the time.
Yeah.
Based in New York, yeah.
But I just think about like, like if I drew editorial cartoons about like my local select board, right? It could have like a big impact, right? Like when you're like, there is like this power to editorial cartooning that it's like you have to use kind of responsibly. Like if I drew like vicious caricatures of my neighbors, right? Like it would like really upset people.
They're there.
And then maybe there's a place for that sometimes, but I think that that's like one of the big differences between doing local editorial cartoons and like some of the big national things.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got to, I spent about a year avoiding phone calls and texts from the mayor of Cincinnati, who kept, like he would text me on just random days asking to go out to dinner or to get a drink, because he thought that if we got together and I got to know him as a person, I would stop drawing editorial cartoons about him. And it's, and that's, and that's a thing that you have to contend with, being a local editorial cartoonist, where
That's something that never would have occurred to me, but yeah.
I mean, you do end up having a very intimate relationship, sometimes with the people that, you're drawing about.
Oh.
And it can lead to awkward, interactions, and, and I'm sure, Ann's, I don't know if, I'm sure you probably encountered elected officials who've tracked you down or something.
Yeah. And has Biden asked you out for dinner and stuff? Or?
Oh, yeah. No, but since I was always working at home, I didn't travel in Washington circles.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've actually been a very consistent critic of the I always do cartoons about the White House Correspondents' Dinner, that they
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if they had it last time, but I just think that's just absolutely ridiculous. I don't think that's our role. We shouldn't be hobnobbing with the people we're covering. So, it's a good thing that I work at home, because no, I mean, the only time it's weird though, it is, and I'm sure you two have had this issue, but it's weird how politicians, even if you're drawing negative stuff about them, seem to want originals of themselves. I mean, I do remember being contacted by, during the George G.W. Bush administration, by someone in Rumsfeld's office, because I was doing a lot of cartoons about Rumsfeld early in the war, the Iraq War, because he was doing those weekly press conferences, where the press was slobbering all over him, and they wanted cartoons, and I was like, these are critical of him, right? And that didn't seem to matter. I guess ego,
Yeah.
And I love that you bring that up though, because I think that gets to like one of the things that I also like love about single panel cartoons specifically is the adversarial nature of them, and that they're like the best cartoons are like inherently adversarial, right? Like you're using them like as a tool, and it has like some power to it. But there's nothing that bothers me more than like cartoons that like defend like people in power, like in that way. It's like, what's the point, right?
Right.
Leaders. That's the thing I don't think people sometimes understand. I mean, even editors don't understand this. We're not cheerleaders. We're not supposed to be doing these happy, fun things. We are criticizing. We're supposed to criticize people in power.
Yeah.
That's
keep them
our
in account.
job.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just had a cartoon spiked without my knowledge last week, and it was criticizing our new Senator-elect JD Vance, and and it wasn't even that bad, but I mean, it was calling out that he, how inexperienced he is, and I think that there might have been a sense that I was being too adversarial, for in this little honeymoon period that we have, and that's our role.
Yeah.
And
I hate to say this, but we have 3 minutes left. Do you mind if we do one more Zoom thing? I have an alternate thing, and because I want to give Ann a chance to have her input too on this question and stuff, because I'm curious to know what it's like to be a national cartoonist and what that responsibility is. But I don't know if you have time to say what you want to say in 2 minutes and stuff. Do you want me to do you want me to go to, or do you want to say something now and then we can go to the third Zoom thing, or do you guys have time?
I'm probably gonna have to leave pretty soon because I have another appointment, but
Closing statements real quick.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
I can talk real quick. I mean, so being a national cartoonist, so when I started out, the reason I became an editorial cartoonist was because I wanted to comment on women's issues, because I had just watched the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings and it really affected me.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I've always done the women issues, but since I was freelance, I was doing them wherever they were in the world, you know. So that was just the way I did it. I still do women's issues for the Post, but I also, you know, the Post is really, even though it's the Washington Post, it's an international newspaper. So I kind of feel like, even though there's tons of local stuff for Washington, I mean, if another paper actually did just Washington stuff, that would be enough. But, you know, occasionally I will do cartoons about how Congress is controlling the local government, how we have no representation in Congress, voting representation, which I think a lot of Americans don't realize. You know, we can vote for our representatives, but they don't have a vote. You know, they don't have a say. We don't have any senators. So, you know, I do those occasionally, but I am very aware that, you know, the Washington Post has an international audience.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think I guess this will be the last part and stuff. I had more questions and stuff, but if you have to go, Ann, and stuff, I don't want to keep you and stuff. So I want to thank you all and stuff. And one of these days, I'll actually buy my Zoom account so we can have a longer talk without interruption and stuff.